Movies and menopause. They go together like salami and ice cream with lubricant. We're going to take a look at why. Ahead on Science Goes to the Movies. Welcome to Science Goes to the Movies, a look at the stories of science and how they change our culture. I'm Faith Saley, and today I'm delighted to be joined by TV writer Jacqueline Reingold and Dr. Michelle Warren, founder and medical director of the Center for Menopause, Hormonal Disorders, and Women's Health in New York City. I'm thrilled to have you both here.
Thank you.
Thank you. So in 1972, the sitcom All in the Family once again shocked the nation with an Emmy Award-winning episode called Edith's Problem. It was something about a trip to Disney World, but Edith's emotions have gone haywire because menopause, menopause, menopause. Okay, so back in 1972, the Bunkers have no freaking idea what's going on. Archie doesn't know, Edith doesn't know. Dr. Warren, please tell me that now, 46 years later, when women have these symptoms, they know.
Well, sometimes, not always though. It's improved, but it's still an area where women come in and say, oh, I had no idea this was menopause. No one told me. Because menopause, to most of the public, is just hot flashes, but it's really a lot more than that. You start getting mood changes, insomnia, memory loss, irregular periods, and yeah, it's not great. But
can you list anything positive in that list? Is there something that starts happening that's
eventually
awesome?
your periods stop. That's very positive.
Okay.
Enough of that, right?
Do you think there's something amiss in our culture? That there are women, presumably in their late 40s, early 50s, coming to you and don't know what's happening?
Yes, definitely. Well, one of the problems is that we don't give much training in this area. One lecture in medical school and maybe a little bit of training after that. But basically, if you want to learn about menopause, you have to make an effort to learn about it after you finish your training.
You mean training as a scientist? I thought you were just saying sort of training as a woman. Like,
as a physician.
Really?
Yeah. And so because of that, there's a fair amount of ignorance on both sides, both the scientific community, the physicians who are treating, and in turn the women as well. Although there's been improvement. I mean, there are support groups and there are people who are trying to address this. But I've had patients in my office telling me, Dr. Warren, why don't you write about this? Why don't you, you know, tell people? The doctors don't know. I had these symptoms and nobody treated me, and nobody wanted to treat me. So, you know, we've still got a long way to go.
Jackie, among your remarkable and varied TV credits, you're a writer for two of the best shows that feature powerhouse actresses in the prime of their lives, Grace and Frankie and The Good Fight. Let's start with Grace and Frankie. Your show, it doesn't have a one-size-fits-all sort of take on menopause. As writers and as artists, how does your team approach different women's different experiences?
Well, on Grace and Frankie, we were extraordinarily lucky that the pilot was written by Marta Kaufman and Howard J. Morris, and they created these two characters, Grace and Frankie, who are polar opposites. So to write for them, we were forced and compelled to write them from different points of view. We also had a team of writers in the writer's room, and the ages went from in their 20s to maybe up to 60. I was there for only season 1, but we all took varied experiences to write for these two clearly extraordinary actresses. And I remember the first day when we met Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin, and we were all completely nervous and in awe of them, and we went down to meet them. They were having lunch with Marta and Howard. All the writers went down to the dining area, and Jane looked at all of us and pointed to me and said, "You, how old are you?" Oh. And I was so nervous, I actually said, I can't remember. I didn't know how old I was. And of course that was silly, but she kindly accepted it. And then she said, where's the writer in their 70s here? Who's going to write for us since we're in our 70s? And we had to admit, well, we didn't have that. So we felt even more compelled to represent them through the women that we knew that were that age as well.
That's a great question that I
Yes.
think very few people ask, much less a leading lady. Where's the writer in her 70s here?
Exactly. I loved that she said that, yeah.
Did you all, in the writer's room, did you all explicitly talk about menopause and how it would affect these characters' journeys?
We certainly talked about these characters. These are postmenopausal women. They are in their 70s, so we depicted them as sexually active and dating, because the premise of the show is now that they're single again. So we talked about it often, constantly. We talked about their sex lives and their dating lives.
And we're going to get to that, because that's juicy. I guess now's a good time as any to get specific with a definition. Menopause, Dr. Warren, is when your menses stop, right? So if you are in your 70s, you're not, or 60s, you are not considered menopausal?
No, you're postmenopausal.
Okay.
So there are a lot of stages in menopause, and probably the worst for women is the perimenopause, when the hormones are going up and down and the periods are irregular. And
So that's before your period stop.
yeah, and that's one of the problems with addressing some of these issues, is that women don't realize that some of their mood changes and their hot flashes, even, and their insomnia are due to the hormones, and neither do their doctors. So it's not until their periods stop, and some of them still have terrible hot flashes. It's not until then that the doctor says, aha, now we can treat you.
Ah!
I know.
Jackie, you're shaking.
I know, it's appalling, isn't it, that now in 2018 we're still dealing with doctors that are ignorant. It's extraordinary.
But from the point of view of a writer, this is this time in a woman's life that happens to just about everybody.
Right.
Is very dramatic. Like, there's where you can look for drama and comedy, and I can't think of any shows or movies where this is taken on explicitly. I mean, you'd think Lifetime could do a movie a night, made for TV movie a night.
Well,
right.
I mean, sadly, that wonderful All in the Family episode, which I love, it's hysterically funny, but it is still the most prominent representation of menopause that everybody thinks of. And it was, written by two men.
In 1972.
In 1972, a show created by the TV genius Norman Lear, who is a man, it was called Edith's Problem, but it's actually about Archie's problem. It's all about the man and the problems he's having.
In Grace and Frankie, Lily Tomlin decides to combat her postmenopausal vaginal dryness by making this homemade concoction of organic yam lube, yam jam. At least it's organic, right? Okay, so as a doctor, is this medically recommended?
No, I don't think that's going to work.
Okay, A, it's not recommended, and you don't think it's going to work?
Yeah, it's neither. It's really, I mean...
Is this like a fast train to a yeast infection?
Yeah, I mean, really, and the thing is, there are physiologic changes in the vagina that are treatable. And the top layer disappears or becomes very thin.
Wait, nobody told me about things disappearing besides periods. Okay.
Yeah.
The top layer of the vagina disappears.
Yeah, it's called the superficial layer. It either disappears or gets very, very thin.
Okay. And that's where the moisture comes from? That's where vaginal
Well,
lubrication?
the moisture also comes from beneath as well.
Okay.
But you'll start losing the folds in the vagina. You lose elasticity. It's
why? Because your body's like, we don't need this?
The estrogen, you can give back the estrogen and you see everything come back. So it's an easily treatable situation. Now, if you've been without estrogen for a long time and you have these changes, it can cause the vagina to shrink. And in which case, sometimes you need dilators to get things back to normal.
Did you know this?
No, that I didn't know.
Yeah.
I certainly know of the phrase vaginal atrophy, which we talked about endlessly on Grace and Frankie.
Oh, you
would
did?
often
Good
talk
for
about
you.
it. Yes.
Did you use that phrase in the show?
Oh, many times.
Oh, that's
yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and the doctors have now tried to get away from using the word atrophy because women, you know, get so
scary.
upset, but that's what happens. Atrophy is called shrinking. It's another word for shrinking. It's a scientific word for shrinking.
Jackie, in an industry that loves youth, how do you make these characters sing?
Well, I think there are two ways. One is that you don't accept that youth is our primary focus and goal, and in another way, you challenge. You watch the characters struggle, living in a world that is driven by youth. So on Grace and Frankie, these women are very sexual and sexually active, and we're all told that older women shouldn't be that, but the show is all about their sex lives and their dating lives. On The Good Fight, Christine Baranski, who is also an amazing actress, she's younger. I think her character is about 60, but she's newly married and she's having sex. And on the last season, her marriage was rocky and she had a new boyfriend on the show. So I think you challenge the stereotypes and show that, yes, it's true, but we're going to fight that truth with our own new stories.
Are we seeing a dearth of older women, older female characters, because there is such a lack of older female writers and producers and showrunners and directors?
Well, that's true, but the good news is that it is changing. So there are shows like Grace and Frankie and showrunners like Marta Kaufman and Michelle King on The Good Fight. But we have a ways to go. Also because it's a corporate culture and it's a profit-driven culture, and there's resistance to change.
Does this bias also exist in medical research, would you say,
Yes.
Dr. Warren?
Well, of course, for research, because for a long time we didn't include women in a lot of clinical trials. That's changed. That changed maybe 30 years ago, where they made a specific effort to address women's health.
So we see tons of, drugs for erectile dysfunction, but not so many for hot flashes, right?
Well, there are quite a few for hot flashes, and recently there have been some non-hormonal options that can be tried. No, the drug field is actually interested because it's a huge demographic. I mean, huge numbers of women. I read in the Times once that somebody turns menopausal every 10 seconds. So
I love that. You guys are a great team because almost everything you say makes Jackie laugh.
Right.
Is menopause funny?
Well, it
As
is
a
funny. I
writer?
just want to say, because that not only is the demographic large for the drug companies, but for television audience as well. Especially because although there are drugs, there are very few TV shows that address this. So it's waiting to happen. And yes, is menopause funny? Yes, it's hysterical. If it's happening to someone else, that's when it's funny. So
What is funny about it?
well, what's funny is the idea that we age and we're mortal, and comedy comes in usually, I think, because of our human foibles and frailties, and the way we can look at things is by finding the humor in them, so that we don't cry, we laugh, which every time exactly she says something, I laugh, because what are you going to do? Cry? Well, you could, but it wouldn't be a very enjoyable life if you cried at every piece of bad news. So I laugh.
And Dr. Warren, what about menopause is dramatic? What does leave people in tears in your care?
well, I have a lot of patients who are afraid to take treatment. And I tell them, look, if you want to lose your partner, your job, and your sanity, don't take any treatment. But you're at risk for losing all those things.
Truly.
Oh, it's terrible.
Why? Why does menopause?
As an example, I had a patient who was a lawyer, and she got up to give her summation of the case and defense, and she got all hot and red, and she couldn't remember where she was. And she said, I completely lost it for about 30 seconds. And it was terrible. And she said, I can't, she was at the top of her game. She's a very good lawyer. And all of a sudden, she's not together. And at 50, many women are in leadership positions. They're at the prime of their lives. They can't deal with not sleeping and having hot flashes. You're at a meeting. You're on television. You get a hot flash. It's very embarrassing. And it's sad.
Wait, what? Sorry. No, you're right.
Yeah,
It is. The stakes are very high for women at that time of their life.
Yeah.
And Dr. Warren's example there of the lawyer in front of like doing a summation of a case leads me to ask you, Jackie. You're writing for The Good Fight right now.
Yes.
Why haven't we seen Diane Lockhart go through menopause?
That's a great question. We're about to start
Tomorrow.
season 3, so maybe she will. But I think Dr. Warren will also say that I know a lot of women that did not have any symptoms, and they sailed right through it. So not everybody suffers that way. And Diane Lockhart is having problems of a different sort on The Good Fight. So she's a feminist Democrat living in an era of Trump, and she's a white law partner working at an African-American firm, and she's also newly married to a man who I think voted for Ted Cruz. So she has an assortment of issues other than menopausal, but maybe let's see what happens in season 3.
Wait, she is married to a man who voted for Ted Cruz?
Correct.
And they have sex?
Correct. Yes, they have wonderful sex.
No yam lube involved.
Not that I have ever seen, no.
So is that the goal, to live like Diane Lockhart, fighting the good fight with little thought of physicalities and age?
Well, I think of Diane Lockhart as a goddess. So if we can aspire to be a goddess and be a powerful, sexy, smart, ambitious, passionate woman, why not?
Dr. Warren, are there some women older than 50 who, in fact, are not experiencing any menopause symptoms at all?
Well, I wouldn't say at all. I mean, many women don't get the terrible symptoms. About 1/3 of them don't.
Really?
2/3 do, though. So.
Okay, if you don't mind my being personal, because you're nodding vigorously, were you in the lucky third?
Not so much.
Okay. So 2/3 do. I shouldn't get too hopeful here.
But let me just say that the vaginal issue is going to surface eventually with everybody, because with the loss of estrogen, you start getting some of the changes that I described, and it's going to happen to everybody. So if you want to have an active sex life, you need to do something about that. Painful sex is one of the most common things that I see in my office, and a lot of women are afraid to ask about it. They think that there's nothing that you can do and there's no treatment. Well, that's not true.
There's this amazing scene in Grace and Frankie from season 4 where Jane Fonda just whips it all off. And the eyelashes are gone, the makeup, the hair extensions, and she says, "This is the reality of me and everything that goes along with my age." And it's an amazing and exciting thing to say to an oppressive or confining society. This is where I am, love it or leave it. But I mean, to hell with society. I don't want to look old for myself. Do you know what I mean? I mean, like, as a doctor, as an artist, what advice do you have for when the battle is inside you, when it's between ourselves and our own internal desire to stay looking and feeling young?
Well, take off your glasses before you look in the mirror.
Why? So it's blurry?
Yeah, and invest in your health, and take care of yourself. Find some time for yourself, and take care of yourself. And I personally don't think the 50 is old. I don't think 60 is old. And in my mother's generation, it was.
Yeah.
But now it's a different thing. Yeah, there's a picture behind you. That's great. Here, there we are.
Yeah.
Okay, Jackie, I don't want you to reveal too much what's behind the magic curtain, but we all know that people on TV are made to look their best. Are women of a certain age still sort of susceptible to body image issues that plague young girls?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
I am susceptible.
Yes.
I mean, as much as I'm aware of the issues and the pressure from society, we should all look young, I feel it as much as anybody else. And we are bombarded by television and film, by young women all the time. So it's absolutely true.
I mean, look how good Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin look.
They look amazing.
They look amazing, but do you think that TV shows kind of play a role in that?
Absolutely.
Like, we look at them and they're,
Yes.
I think they're both in their mid to late 70s playing early 70-somethings.
I believe that's correct, yes.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
And they look almost impossibly great.
They do. Well, I think we have to understand that as actresses, they are under scrutiny in terms of the way they look 1,000 times more than we are just as women, and we feel the scrutiny. So it's understandable that actresses, feel intense pressure to make themselves look as young as possible, and I understand that.
Do you think that there is some liberation that comes from being menopausal and postmenopausal? Some liberation from the strict standards of beauty, or as women in our culture, are we just doomed? Am I doomed to feel that to my grave, that I should not eat too many carbs?
Oh, well, yes, there is some liberation. I mean, and you begin to realize that you can't wear the same clothes that you wore when you were 20. So, I mean, there's an acceptance there.
Unless you're Jane Fonda, right? Then you can.
Exactly.
Well, yeah.
Although I think she was Barbarella in her 20s. I haven't seen her in that
She's
lately.
always been great.
Yeah.
So, one thing I found very liberating is I can say what I think.
Oh.
I'm not so scared about losing my job or hurting people's feelings. I can really just say what I think. And that's very liberating. Very liberating.
Do you feel, as a writer, with more and more experience under your belt, that you can, through your writing, more often say what you think, or make meaningful messages come through your writing, even when it's comedy?
Absolutely, I certainly try to. I'm writing a pilot now, which is about a menopausal superhero. So it's a woman going through menopause, and when she puts on a giant pair of old lady panties, she gets super strength and she can fight all the injustice that's being directed at older women. But at the same time, she still wants to look young and pretty for her husband. So it's taking a comic point of view and saying whatever I want to say, because it's all my own writing about being an older woman in this society.
This must turn into a series.
I
I cannot
so.
wait. What is her name when she is super menopausal lady?
I'm not sure exactly. I think her name might be Hag Woman, perhaps. I don't know. I haven't decided yet.
Right. I mean, a crone and a hag.
Exactly. Exactly. The image of the older woman mythologically as being powerful.
Yeah, the long white braid.
Exactly.
All that wisdom woven in.
Exactly. And this woman is very sexual too when she's transformed.
Sex is dramatic and complicated at every age. What's the writer's room like when you guys are talking about sex for characters in their 8th decade, actually, if you do the math?
Yeah.
It's as fun and funny and as romantic as it is when you're talking about sex about young people. But it's complicated, so it adds more story complications and more opportunities for humor and drama, because they have new issues, as we're just learning from Dr. Warren. How are they going to deal with that? And how is the world going to perceive them? Because we don't like to see older women as sexual. So it's a wealth of storytelling opportunity.
And so you talked about vaginal dryness being sort of inexorable.
Yeah.
What other complications, challenges are there with postmenopausal sex?
As you get older, I mean, there's been a controversy about stopping pap smears at 65. Yeah, because the idea was women weren't having sex and therefore, yeah.
That's where that came from? Somebody thought it was a good idea to stop pap smears because ladies don't have sex after 65?
Well, as you know, it's caused by a virus, the HPV virus, the cancer of the cervix. And it's unlikely that they're going to acquire the virus at that age, and it's going to lead to cervical cancers. But a lot of us feel that many women are having sex, and some of them are not very careful.
About contraception, or protection, rather, because they don't need to be careful about contraception.
Exactly.
Right.
And they're not too careful about who they're having sex with. So, we should be doing PAPs probably on certain patients.
Yeah, I read a study not too long ago about sort of the uptick in STDs in nursing homes and retirement communities.
That's right. Yeah.
But all of this is fantastic fodder for
great.
a writer.
I love it.
Because one also wonders how in a new relationship or even just a hookup, like a geriatric hookup, how often do people feel comfortable explicitly having these conversations, right?
Well, probably they don't, which is humorous, but also sad, because we're all uncomfortable talking about sex, and probably older people weren't raised with perhaps some of the more comfortable feelings that I hope younger people are getting raised with in their willingness to talk about it. But I love the idea. It's true. I remember reading that study too, that nursing homes are extremely sexually active, and we don't like to think of that, but it's true. Human beings are sexual, and there's nothing wrong with it. And it's wonderful that older people are having sex. I hope they have more sex.
What's the big message you would like people to know about menopause?
Well, I think if you're having these symptoms and they're not explained, any of the symptoms that I've described in the right age group, find a doctor who's menopause friendly. The North American Menopause Society has a website called menopause.org, and you can look up your zip code and find a doctor who's menopause friendly, because it's treatable. And the sad things I see in my office are people who have gone 3 and 4 years with no treatment and have lost their jobs because they couldn't function. I think that's very sad. We shouldn't allow that.
And Jackie, what would you want people to take away?
Well, I would want people to say that if you aren't seeing enough depictions of older women on television, then, you know, vote with your remote. Don't watch those shows, and watch the shows that do show complex, passionate, smart, funny older women.
Okay, I'm keeping my fingers crossed for your menopausal heroine, aren't you? The
absolutely.
superhero we've all been waiting for.
Thank you.
I want to commend you. I don't think any of us once said the change during this episode, and yet we said vagina just a record-breaking number of times. Thank you both for being
welcome.
here.
Thank you.